Love. There is nothing more sacred to us than the bonds between us as human beings. But in life, things aren't always as cut and dry. Sometimes they go bad, and the people you once trusted can take pleasure in reducing you down to nothing more than a utility. It is a place where a man's rights cease to be, laid out as a sacrifice in the name of women's liberation. Welcome to the show, everybody. So we've got a wonderful topic. We're talking about child support and alimony this week, and we've got our wonderful panelists here. We've got the lovely Hannah Wallen.
Hello, I'm Hannah Wallen, author of Breaking the Glasses, breakingtheglasses.blogspot.com. Apparently I can't talk today, so this may be all you guys hear from me. But, yeah, back to you, Rachel.
You can't talk this week. Why?
No, apparently I'm tongue-tied now.
You're going to be fine. We've also got the wonderful Karen Strawn. How you doing, Karen?
Oh, you know me. I'm keeping on, so I don't know, you can find me online at owningyourshit.blogspot.com and YouTube user /girlwriteswhat, as if you guys probably didn't even already know that. And there's a discussion that was just uploaded today between me and Stardust, and you can find that on the channel Thinking Ape TV if you want to go and give it a listen. Try not to be antagonistic in the comments. I know that he doesn't not welcome that, but things have been a little hostile lately in some sections of the manosphere, and I'd hate to add to that. So, but by all means, go check it out. It's long, but I don't know. I think it's probably worth it. So there you go. That's me.
Thank you, Karen. And we've got the lovely Anna Cherry. Hey, you there, Anna?
Yes, the mute thing was far away from my hand. I wasn't ready. I'm sorry, Senpai, I failed you.
Okay.
Well, hello. So I'm Anna Cherry. I'm a cosplayer and adult entertainer, as well as occasional writer, trying to increase more of that. And I have a YouTube channel as well, where I'm have a new video series called Tropes vs. Men that is currently awaiting its second installment, and that's coming soon. So everyone who's been asking about it, be patient. It's on its way. And that's about it for me.
Thank you, Anna. Now, before we plunge head first into this topic, I think we'll go into our show notes and discuss some of the various news items that we've got, if that's all right with the rest of you guys.
No talking today. None.
Never.
No.
I'm just kidding. You don't have a choice.
Just a bit.
All right. Saving Chase update. The ongoing battle over a young boy's genital integrity still rages on in Delray Beach, Florida. A court has since issued a warrant for Heather I always butcher this name, Hieronymus' arrest for deciding against the court-ordered circumcision of her 4-year-old son. Originally, both parents had agreed on the surgery, but after becoming educated on the function of the foreskin, his mother rejected the original parenting plans. She has been fighting it ever since. The warrant comes after she failed to appear in court with her son, believing that they would again try to force him to undergo a circumcision, a surgery that terrifies the young boy and is medically unnecessary. Hieronymus and her son are currently hiding in a domestic abuse shelter, hoping to protect herself and her son. For more information on the status of this story and on how you can help, please visit savingchase.org. You guys want to talk about this? Anything?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that here we are dealing with a situation where the men's rights activist aspect of this is supporting the mother against the father because we're dealing with a bodily autonomy issue for a little boy.
And it's the men who's the little boy's rights.
Yeah. The feminists constantly harp on us as if we never support women in anything. But as you can see, we're supporting a woman in good parenting and actually having the right to change her mind on a parenting choice when she learns that the original choice may not have been the healthiest course of action. So to everybody out there that likes to say, well, men's rights activists just automatically oppose women and mothers, well, fuck you. Obviously
Yeah.
we don't.
Yeah, and this is a very important case. I mean, I personally think it's very, very important because what we're tackling here, and this, might go into higher courts and things like that, because this is very much a bodily autonomy issue. This is very much a human rights issue, because this boy, I mean, when this whole court battle started, he was an infant, and now he is 4 years old. He knows exactly what's going on. He'll know that there's something different, that something has been taken from him, that he was, and that's the thing, he seems to be completely petrified of this.
Yeah, that's
from what we hear.
And that's another aspect of it here. How can the court actually treat this as a simple contract issue when there is a human body being altered as a result of the contract, if it gets upheld? And it's really ridiculous. If this was any other thing, if this was a marriage contract, if this was a contract to circumcise a girl or get a girl breast enhancement surgery or cut off his little finger instead of his foreskin, there would be hell to pay. There would be nobody saying, "Oh, well, she made an agreement. They can't change that," And if there had been, say, information come out that a normal medical treatment that gets done all the time. Let's say conclusive proof came out that childhood vaccines cause autism, which we know is not true. But let's say it did come out, and she had agreed to do that ahead of time, and now this information comes out, and it's proof. Will they say, well, you still have to get that done to your child?
Yeah.
This is crazy. Because it's circumcision, we have to ignore the fact that the child's body is being affected and talk only about the aspect of contracts.
Yeah.
And do parents really have the right to sign a contract for a cosmetic body modification for an underage child?
Well,
What I find amazing is courts throw out prenuptial agreements all the time.
Yeah.
Right. They throw out those kinds of contracts all the time. They say, well, this simply just does not apply, and I will choose to ignore it. Right.
Yeah. If it was protecting the husband's income from the ex-wife, then they would be, oh no, well, this doesn't mean anything because it's unfair to her.
Yeah. And this is just it's really ridiculous, and it's really troubling, because they're seeing this in terms of a child being property rather than being, a human being that has rights to his own body and what should happen to that. And up until the point where he's able to make those kinds of decisions about altering his body or choosing to alter it or not, people should protect him. But I mean, I feel that way about children anyway.
It's really, the more you think about it, the more mind-boggling it is. If my son at school gets a headache, and I've said he can have aspirin, the school nurse cannot just give him aspirin. It's the law protects the body so much under any other circumstance. You can't give a kid 2 aspirin, over-the-counter aspirin at school. Or even, I couldn't even go into a school and give my kid aspirin on school grounds without prior authorization. This idea that you can inflict, this body modification on a child just based on a single decision at one point in time is crazy, considering how much we protect the body under all other circumstances.
Yeah.
It's like the fact that it's a penis makes them blind to the fact that it's part of a human body.
Yeah, and they're certainly not going to protect the parents' rights when the parents' decision is something like endangering the child. Like if for religious reasons they decide we're not going to treat this child who has a terminal illness, we're not going when it's completely treatable.
Child Protective Services has taken children under that circumstance and prosecuted parents.
You know, we're not going to give this child a blood transfusion because that's endangerment. But I guess we'll move on to the next topic unless anyone has any objections.
Well, I think that's a good idea.
Going twice. Okay. No boys allowed school day. Classrooms at a school in Seattle University recently excluded boys from a workshop on math and science as a part of their annual Expanding Your Horizons program, bringing together 500 middle school girls to learn about math, science, and engineering. The project organizer had this to say, quote, "We're not trying to exclude boys. We're trying to provide an opportunity for girls who might not even realize these career opportunities are available to them," unquote. This seems to assume that all male students know of the career options available to them in these same fields. There's no mention of an equivalent program for the boys of these same schools. But of course, people seem fine with this because somehow the presence of boys is hiding these careers from these girls, and they need this information delivered on a silver platter, or else they will never become interested in STEM. And this is something that's very interesting to me, because this seemed like a really nice workshop and a really great opportunity, but they only rolled out the red carpet for these girls. And this was a workshop, I think, that was done at a college, where they brought in about 500 girls on, I think, on a Saturday, and they said, you know, boys weren't allowed to come into the space and come to this workshop to learn about science and math and robotics and all of these different things.
So these people think girls are stupid.
Yeah.
Well,
somehow.
I mean, how old are these girls? Are they like 4?
They're middle school. They're middle school age.
So they're old enough to have like been on the internet and watched television and you know, heard news reports and listened to radio and talked to people outside their homes and stuff like that. And they're expected to not know that STEM professions exist. They're expected to get to their teenage years without knowing that, and they've attended school. And whose fault would it be if a 13-year-old girl doesn't know STEM professions exist after she's been in school for, you know, from kindergarten through 6th or 7th or 8th grade, depending on how old she started and what, you know, how well she progressed and everything? I mean, is that, you know, is that society's fault, or is that the fault of the boys in her class, or is that her parents' fault, or is that maybe that the teachers haven't been presenting these things in class? How would a girl get to that age and not know these things, not know what scientists are, not know that math exists and so on? That's kind of strange.
Well, it's clear that they think that everybody is stupid because they have a program that specifically excludes boys, and then they say it's not like we're trying to exclude boys, right? Except you're excluding boys, right? That's what you're doing. You're excluding boys. You're not trying to, but you're doing it. You're managing.
Well, maybe they are so stupid that they don't realize what they're doing.
I mean,
well, this is exclusive. We're just not letting anybody in.
Yeah.
Well, you know, being one of the, I don't know, I wouldn't say, well, one of the younger panelists here, even in 6th grade, I remember I did a book report on Rachel Carson, who is a female scientist, and she was really helpful in realizing the effects that chemicals can have on the environment and how it can kill out certain species and how it was harming the population of hawks and eagles and things like that. And you know, to go through school and not know about people like that, to not know about like Jane Goodall or you know, just really interesting individuals like Margaret Burke White, the photographer. These people who, you know, didn't really seem to care that they were women. Like, if someone had told them, like, they can't because they're a woman, like, they missed the memo. They just did whatever the fuck they pleased.
What I find really, really troubling is this idea that women need to have a woman as an example As you know, like that they need to have this sort of extra effort to get them into, like, they didn't need that with veterinary medicine. They didn't need that with nursing used to be a male profession.
Yeah.
That was like 100, 200, 250 years ago, right? It got completely taken over. Education for kids was used to be a male profession for the most part, and then and that got taken over by women a long time ago. If women are interested in it, they will go into it. I mean, like, you look at the law, you look at business, you look at all of these areas where that seem to appeal to women, biology, biochemistry, all of those things. Women have really not had that difficult a time becoming large minority, if not a majority, in a lot of those things. Psychology used to be completely dominated by men. Now it's completely dominated by women. I wonder why? Because they find it interesting, right? And this desperate need to push women into areas where yes, some women are highly interested in this stuff, but there's just not going to be as big a pool of women who find what my boyfriend does, which I find completely mind-numbingly fucking boring, right? Women aren't going to en masse decide, okay, I want to tag some PLCs and deal with HMIs and I don't even fucking care. Like, how can you work with that all day? He manages just fine. I would want to kill myself after a week, right? You're just not going to interest as many women as you are men, and I don't understand why we feel the need to force it.
Well, the stupid thing is that they seem to think that women can't make decisions for themselves.
What's interesting is that there's a ton of careers that most people don't get alerted to when they're in high school, like that job where you can just shoot chickens, like frozen chickens, out of a cannon at a windshield, an airplane windshield, to test the strength of the glass. But the interesting thing is, I find that I keep hearing from different individuals, parents and stuff like that, who find out that they might put their boys into a program where they learn about science, and then they realize that there is sort of this super fast highway for girls to get into those same professions, and there simply aren't going to be those opportunities for their sons, because these people are desperate to get women into STEM. And so there are going to be men who bust their ass to get to those professions, but people have rolled the red carpet out for these girls. They said, okay, yes, please come in. We want to have the appearance of being inclusive. But
one of the things that blows my mind about these pushes is this presumption that being female means that we can't get there without help. Just out of hand, and that's not supposedly not sexist, but the fact that a lot of women don't choose to go into that profession, well, that's evidence of sexism. But these feminists and other social justice ideologues just assuming that women can't get there on their own, that women can't make that decision, just know what we want, do the studying, do the seeking, and do the job seeking, and so on, that we're just not capable of doing that without somebody holding our hand and pushing us from behind and all that stuff. That's not sexist. I'm sorry, but screw them for even thinking that we're such wimps that we can't make our decisions for ourselves. And I don't know if maybe I have a different perspective because a lot of the women in my family have gone into STEM professions. My grandmother was in medicine. I've got cousins who are engineers and also cousins who are in medicine. And just the idea that this is something that excludes women and has always excluded women is insane. And then the idea that women can't just, if we want to do something like this, that we can't just get up and go do it, is equally insane to me, because I've been watching women do that around me all my life. And it's, they do the same thing with just about any area that they want to call male dominated. And to speak back to the having to have female examples, I completely agree with that. And my main thing that I've done all my life has been photography. I had a camera in my hands when I was 2 years old. My dad gave me a camera and started teaching me. And of course, my big idol in photography is my dad, because I learned from him. He's my mentor. But both of us have kind of idolized Neil Leifer. And I didn't need a female photographer to look up to. Not that there are not female photographers to look up to, but it didn't make me feel like I couldn't do it, because my ideal sports photographer was a man. It didn't make me feel like I shouldn't be out on the football field with a camera because I'm a girl, just because the person whose imagery I was looking at and saying, hey, this is great, I want to do stuff that looks this good, was a guy. And I don't understand why anybody would make that connection. Well, a guy did it, that means I can't. Isn't that exactly the kind of mentality that they're trying to fight against, according to their claims? And yet here they are perpetuating it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to bring it over to the next topic, unless anyone of you has a final thing to say.
That was it for me.
All right. Going once, going twice. We're going to the final news item, and this is going to be a bit of a doozy. And Karen, you might have to step in here and give me a little bit of info on some of this, because this takes place in Canada.
All right.
All right. Controversy surrounding Cafe's new billboard. The Canadian Association for Equality's new billboard has only been up for a little over a week, and feminists already have their panties in a bunch, with various news outlets weighing in on the spectacle, the worst of which being an article by Leigh McLaren of the Globe and Mail entitled, quote, "How Men's Rights Groups Are Distorting the Debate About Equality," unquote. With a title like that, you already know what you're getting into. Lacking any ounce of self-awareness, this is a terrible name, McLaren mentions making jokes in her pregnancy about her son being a white male, then goes on to say how it was fine to joke and speak ill of her unborn child due to his race and gender because most of the men she knew got the joke. Ultimately, she said that the sort of men who didn't get the joke were bitter, privileged white men who rightly pointed out that life isn't as easy for them as she seems to believe. Statements which she appears to have shrugged off, speaking instead of her fascination of men she believes to be privileged, who see this privilege as a hindrance. Quote, "I became intrigued by these men who seemed to see their maleness as a hindrance and a handicap rather than what it seemed to me, a transferable lifetime membership to the champagne-soaked VIP room of General Advantage," unquote. This woman cannot see the irony in her chastising men who hold the opinion that anyone, regardless of gender, can be at risk for domestic violence. She pushes the very attitude that prevents men and women from receiving equal services when they are victimized. Even if she was right about the statistics being faulty, she's still wrong about the need for services for men. Even if male victims were to make up only a small portion of domestic violence sufferers and rape survivors, it would not eliminate the need for shelters and support for those men. But common sense is lost on McLaren, who believes that the root cause of domestic violence is misogyny and that we should just accept that. She missed the whole point of the campaign, which is not to divert attention from female victims, but to show that this is a complicated issue that affects a diverse group of people, and that ignoring this fact is only contributing to the problem. This woman is crazy. I'm just saying, she does not realize what she's basically saying in this article, because she starts it out by saying something along the lines of that she was rubbing her pregnant belly and saying, "Oh, I'm having what the world needs."
Another
white male. Like, oh my God, you are so fucking terrible.
I don't know.
For that statement.
I don't know if she's a sociopath or if she genuinely just was like raised on feminist ideology. So drinking the Kool-Aid, from the teat nonstop all her life. So she just genuinely felt that the the patriarchy was this terrible thing that existed, but also benefited every single male. You know, if you're born with a penis, that's just like a straight, and if you're white especially, that's just like a straight, you know, ride into wealth and power. So I don't know if she genuinely believes that, or if she's just being a sociopath.
Yeah.
But interestingly, that about the violence thing, that is something that's been perpetuated in Sweden, my favorite poster country of feminism, where Norway, for instance, which is its neighboring country, they have an idea that you know, you need to have at least a minimum of a year of therapy. If you're a violent man, you need to have a minimum of a year of like intensive therapy, and then there's more therapy after that, and there's even more therapy. And Sweden, on the other hand, believes that violence, male violence, is inherent in the maleness and the patriarchy system, and that there's nothing that can cure it ever, and because it's just how men are, and you know, the only way to get rid of it is to get rid of men. And of course, Norway sees great results in what they do. There's a massive drop in recidivism, while in Sweden, well, it is a very, very safe country, but you do have those people who are unhinged enough to literally be violent and beat others. And there is no help for them because there's no system of help. They don't even believe that they can get help. And of course, the repeat offenders, people who just cannot be changed because the help is not there for them. And it seems like somebody who was either raised in that ideology or just is rapidly promoting it because of its political might.
Yeah, she seemed to think that there was that these people, oh my gosh, the poor men's is like that's how she views this. She views this as these people who are so privileged whining, like that something just didn't go their way. That it's so incredibly oh my god, I don't even know what to really feel about this, because she starts making a whole bunch of arguments to authority, saying like, oh my gosh, look at, you know, this is generally known things that women are like 80% of all of the victims of domestic violence, and that when they're in danger, that they're more at risk for being like strangled and beaten up and stuff like that. I mean, but the thing about it is that she doesn't seem to realize is that, you know, when women don't have that sort of edge, like in size or strength, they are more likely to use a blunt object. They're more likely to use a weapon of some kind, or to drug somebody.
Oh, don't you know, Rachel, when men throw things, they're always throwing chainsaws. And when women throw things, they're always throwing boxes of Kleenex. That's how it works.
So maybe you can give us a little bit of a insight on these things, because I didn't have access to, or didn't know where to look into the statistics, well, the Canadian statistics. But
statistics come from a Stats Canada study. Or a survey, the General Social Survey, and they found that about equal numbers of men and women have experienced domestic violence over the previous 5 years, and it's about 600,000 of each across Canada. So, you know, 585,000 men and 601,000 women, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can amount to, you know, and according to the survey results, yes, women are more likely to experience multiple incidents of domestic violence. But at the same time, you learn a little bit about psychology, and you realize that men generally, women apologize more than men, not because not because of, you know, sort of subjugation and feeling like they're subordinate, but because they have a lower threshold of what they consider to be an offense, and so when they themselves cross that threshold, they apologize, right? Whereas men, both on the giving end and the receiving end, they have a much higher threshold of what they consider to be offensive or hurtful or whatever, right? So it may well be that men are underreporting. We know that men underreport when it comes to street violence. They did a survey, Stats Canada again, not too long ago, that the results were shocking because women in urban areas were just as likely now to report being assaulted on the street in public as men. Oh my goodness, right? But if you actually go in and you look at the data, what women typically report is somebody pushing her on the subway, right? Or somebody sort of getting in her face and maybe doesn't even lay a finger on her. If she feels threatened and that person's capable of carrying out the threat, that still counts as assault, and women tend to report those things, right? Whereas with men, most of the men who actually reported their assaults were reporting from the emergency room, right? Like if it didn't send you to the emergency room, it's not worth the bother to men, right? So it's a completely, I mean, surveys are good and all, but I think that they're only so good, right? Like they're only so gonna reflect reality so accurately, given the proclivities of men and women. And then on top of that, so I mean, like I guess they sort of may have a point that for more women than men, this is the kind of situation that you would need help to get out of. But at the same time, that doesn't justify, I mean, even if she's right and 20% of the victims are men, only 20%, why are only like 0.2% of the beds in the country designated for men? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why are none of the services there available to help those men? They should at least be getting 20% of the money and 20% of the funding and the services and the assistance. And they're just not getting that. So.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. These people, they have no problems asking for funding for a small portion of the population who has a specific problem. They have no issues doing that, but the moment it comes down to who's the biggest victim, they just throw other people under the bus, and it's just so incredibly ridiculous. I mean, if you want to argue, like, how many people, if you want to start arguing things, I mean, then why even provide services for trans people? I mean, because they consistently end up being a small portion of the population. But that's the thing. That doesn't mean that they aren't as important and that their problems aren't important.
Exactly.
Well, this is something that you sort of see with social justice ideology, like across the board, with the whole victim politics, the victim the victim status exploitation, and the privileged dialogue that they sort of throw at straight white men, and in particular them above everybody else. But if they're talking about trans issues, it's cis people. If they're talking about female issues, it's men. If they're talking about race issues, it's white people. It's the same thing every time. The privileged dialogue is a social manipulation tool. It's not actually a truth. It's a way of othering people to excuse the expression of bigotry towards them. First you create the illusion of disadvantage as the norm and treat the absence of disadvantage as an unearned, unfair advantage. And that creates two things. One, a sense of disenfranchised resentment in the proposed in-group for the people that are labeled disadvantaged, and a sense of something like survivor's guilt in the proposed out-group, those people who are labeled advantaged. And that creates the impression that the state of being disadvantaged, or the state of not being disadvantaged, is a thing that the quote advantaged unquote have taken wrongfully for themselves and are keeping from everybody else, or inflicting the disadvantage on others to keep themselves up and to keep other people down. And that the whole diatribe that this woman went on is very characteristic of how that creates, how that sets up the mental gymnastics for her to excuse bigotry and hatred towards a group of people, because she's basically made them the bad guys just by virtue of having the wrong existence.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, in Canada, at least here in Alberta, I know that there's at least one shelter for battered women, because they when they leave they can take their kids to a shelter. They can't take their dog or their cat, and they don't necessarily want to leave their dog or their cat behind. So there is actually at least one shelter in my area where these women can take their dog or cat and leave it in a home-like setting, not a kennel, but an actual sort of like a dog sitter who will take that pet in and whatever it is, bird, hamster, rat, whatever, and look after it while she gets help, right? So we actually have domestic violence shelters for pets in Canada, but we don't have any for men. Or we have 2 beds in Winnipeg for men. And that's it, across the country. That's all we got.
That's really fucked up. But don't you know, Karen? They don't have like the floppy ears, and they can't do the thing where they turn the head and just kind of the big face.
Men have a hard time figuring out how to do the Bambi eyes. Some of it is actually down to sort of the neoteny thing, and women sort of being seen as alternative children almost. That they never quite, and this is one of the things that drives me fucking crazy. What we now define as emotional intelligence, which essentially means the ability to vomit your emotions all over everyone around you. Not the ability, but the inability to not vomit your emotions all over everyone around you. That we describe as emotional intelligence in women. That's actually not growing out of childhood. That's what that is, and we've somehow redefined it as emotional intelligence in order to be able to cast the greater ability for emotional mastery in men as some kind of defect.
Yeah. It seems like they want to portray men as sort of these lesser sociopaths or even greater sociopaths.
Well, they're defective in some way, right?
Yeah.
And then I mean, here's the thing, because I was watching the Tough Questions or some kind of BBC show, whatever, had Milo Yiannopoulos on it. I don't know if you saw it, but it was glorious. He actually called some stupid feminist cunt darling, because she was like, oh, you can't talk, you don't understand, and he was like, the topic is men. We're talking about men, darling. We're talking about men now, darling. And oh my God, she flipped her shit. It was glorious.
I need to watch that now.
But beware, because he bleached his hair like this really bizarre yellow color, so he like totally went Super Saiyan for it. But yeah, that hair, holy shit.
Was it over 9,000?
And
I hope so.
And while these feminists are just like, how they they talk really fast and they're really excitable, and he's like sitting there picking lint off of his suit while they're looking bored while they're talking, right? It was beautiful. But like you literally have these men saying, this is how we feel, right? This is how we feel, this is how we experience society. And you have a group of feminist women constantly interrupting them to tell them how they're wrong about how they feel, they're wrong about their own experiences, they're wrong about everything, right? We'll tell you what you think, we'll tell you what you feel, we'll tell you what motivates you, and we'll tell you what your experiences are, and if you tell us any different, that's mansplaining.
Yep.
Right? And this is what feminism has done. It has essentially given itself the God-given, or the goddess-given authority to define men from the inside out, and to completely bulldoze over any discussion of men's own perceptions of the world and of themselves, and say, no, you're wrong, this is what you are, right? And it's like the ego involved in that, to sit there and tell a person, no, I completely dismiss everything you say, this is what your experiences are, this is how the world treats you, right? This is what your motivations and intentions are, right? And don't talk back to me because that's mansplaining and that's misogynistic.
So basically the same thing they do to women.
Oh God, yeah, but worse because
Yeah.
at least we just have internalized misogyny,
Yeah,
so we're still not at fault, right?
Nope, men are at fault. We have Stockholm syndrome. We've been
Oh,
kidnapped by all male society. What planet we were taken off of is debatable, considering that I don't recall ever being to one other than this one. But you know,
oh yeah,
um,
no, women were like in an all-female society like
there you
ages ago, and then a whole bunch of men invaded and colonized it and took it over, and that's when the oppression started.
go. Right, right. And it's you gotta love the way they respond to everything. You know, if men are stoic, well, then men are defective because they don't
Yeah,
express their feelings. But then if men start talking about their thoughts and experiences, it's like, oh my God, you fucking piss baby, stop whining,
yeah,
stop bleeding your feels all over us.
or you're dangerous and
Yeah.
misogynistic.
You sound scary. You
Yeah.
sound
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't know that you're misogynistic. It's deep inside you, and you can't even tell that it's going on.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
And then this one
we're
woman,
full of hot throbbing misogyny.
Oh God.
there is this point. I mean, like, because one of these women was talking about, you know, how boy babies are not picked up as quickly as girl babies when they fuss, and they're not comforted as long, and all of that. And this is why they don't develop any emotional intelligence. She actually said that. And then she started talking about a program of re-education of boys to prevent them from beating
Wait,
their
re-education?
wives.
Holy shit.
She didn't call it that. It was a program of educating boys. But anyhow, and the program's called Zero Tolerance. I mean, like a program for preschool boys that's called Zero Tolerance to teach them how not to grow up to be white. Like, what the fuck is, like, what is right? But
Oh my God.
and she sounds like she has compassion for that baby boy who isn't picked up and comforted as much as his sister, right? But at some point, there's this switch that gets flipped, right? And I'm not sure what exact age it is. I guess maybe it depends on the culture and the circumstances. But there is a switch that gets flipped when all of that compassion, right, where she actually sees that boy as a child, right? And children, maybe boy children are not as deserving of compassion as girl children, but they're still deserving of some compassion. There's this like switch that flips from 1 to 0, right? Zero compassion now, right? So they're sitting there and they're like shrieking at these men who are just trying to explain their point of view, right? And interrupting them constantly, and then telling them that they're privileged as men, they're privileged and they're taken seriously, right? When these guys can't even finish a fucking sentence before these harpies start talking over them and yelling at them. I was just like, what fucking universe are you living in, ladies?
Well, it certainly isn't this planet. But you know, I think we should bring
Yeah.
it into the main topic, and we're gonna just you know, start this discussion because you know, it's discussion that needs to be had, and you know, and that would be about, you know, child support and alimony. And I think a good place to really start is to really talk about the people in our lives, because or maybe not go that personal, but I think that there's everybody in here, and probably even a good deal of the people who are listening to us right now live and who will probably be listening to this later on YouTube, who at least know one person whose life has been, you know, affected by, you know, whether it's child support or alimony somehow. We at least know one person who has been completely screwed. And when I say that, I'm talking about somebody who, you know, probably didn't deserve to have this happen to them. You know what I'm saying? Somebody who was probably did a good job, who was probably a good husband, good father, and then they end up, you know, going into some kind of poverty over this, and aren't even able to see their kid, because I probably know at least of 3 that I've met over the past, you know, 5 years, and these are just people who I've met in real life, you know, in passing, and you immediately see just the weight of it in every part of their lives. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna move it through to everybody else.
I can I can attest to this personally, partly because I've lived through it in my family. I'm not going to get real in depth on the personal end of it and start, talking about, like, I'm not going to sit here and talk about my husband's ex-wife on air, because that's not fair. It's not like she can answer me back.
Yeah.
So, but I will talk about what I have seen Ohio's child support system do. Now, not all of what I'm going to talk about happened to my family. And so I don't want people to listen to this and think, God, that woman was crazy. I know I've seen some crazy shit. But a lot of the worst of it, the absolute, godforsaken worst of it, really was stuff that happened to other people around us. We went through some stuff that was unfair. Um, but comparatively, we had it easy when I look at some of what our friends experienced. But what I've seen, one of the things that particularly bothers me with the court system, and I know Ohio is by far not the only place that does this, is a thing called imputed income.
Yeah.
A guy goes into court or goes into his divorce, which doesn't always happen necessarily before a judge. Most American divorces are watched over by a magistrate, and the magistrate actually approves or disapproves things, and it actually is a problem, because the magistrate sometimes approves things that judges will rule are not in compliance with the law, and it gets people into trouble. And one of those things is child support being lower than the court later says it is, or should have been, and so guys end up with back owed child support that shouldn't be back owed. But on the topic of imputed income, guy goes into the child support hearing with proof that he makes $10 an hour, 40 hours a week. And his ex-wife says, well, he could be making this much. He's got a degree in X, or he had a second job and he quit his second job, or I happen to know this employer or that employer would pay him more. And the judge says, well, you should be making $15 an hour. I'm going to base your child support on $15 an hour.
Yeah.
Or a guy goes in and he's unemployed, and a judge accuses him of making money under the table. A guy isn't found, the hearing is had without him, and it is assumed that he has a full-time minimum wage job when he is actually homeless. And these are all circumstances that I've seen over time. Some of them have been people I've known personally. Some of them have been people who have gotten in communication with me after I've talked about my family situation and everything. And the hardest part about it is, and Ohio does this, and I don't know if other states do this. Well, I do know other states do it. I don't know which other states do it and which don't, and I don't know how it is in Canada. But in Ohio, you're not counted as paying child support if you don't pay through the state. And that came into effect, I think, the end of the 20th century, the last couple of years of the 90s. And it actually was in response to accusations of deadbeat dads and so on. That basically you'd have he said, she said regarding whether or not child support was paid, and the state couldn't really prove one way or another, and their solution was to say, well, you still owe it, and that was the first inkling of it. Well, then after welfare reform went through during the beginning of the 20th or 21st century, that cemented it, and Ohio law says you have to pay through the state now. And part of the reason for that is the state gets money for collecting the child support because you have to pay through the state. So if you have a job where your employer is bonded and sends out pay stubs and so on, you're going to get garnished if you owe child support. So, and it can garnish up to 65% or up to 60%, I think it is, of your paycheck. And then, of course, the federal government demands their tax amount, and the state government demands their tax amount, and whatever municipality you live in gets theirs, and whatever municipality you work in, if you don't work and live in the same one, they get theirs. And if you're a dad paying child support, your take-home pay can be 15% of your gross income. And so if you have imputed income as your standard for your child support, and the state is demanding that you pay more than you can, they will leave you with less than enough to go in and fight to have that reduced. So you can't hire a lawyer if you're bringing home, 30 or 40 bucks a week, or a couple $100 a month, and trying to pay rent and buy groceries and pay for your medical bills and so on. And the worst part of it is you can't even get help under that circumstance. I don't know how many other states do this or not, but in Ohio, if the government makes a man homeless and impoverished by taking 60% of his gross income out of his net pay after taxes, they also tell him he makes too much money for welfare by counting that money that they've taken from him as part of his gross income for the test for eligibility.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Oh, I'm going to give somebody else a chance to talk.
That is insane. But, and of course, we don't have any accountability on the part of the receiving end of child support as to what that actually goes to. So we not only have people being basically, as you mentioned, with the taxes and everything else, practically robbed blind to support the child, but we don't know if that money is going to support the child. And I do as well personally have no experience, know people and have experience with those who were very afraid of the harsh reality that is if a mother flexes even the tiniest bit of muscle in court, that child custody will go to her pretty much exclusively. It's very difficult for husbands or for fathers in divorce situations to get custody if they want it. But I did know someone who was like, hey, you know what, we're divorcing, and we're basically leaving this house that has all this expensive stuff in it that we've collected over the years of being married, that you didn't work, but the mother didn't work, but the father has worked, and they bought all the stuff, and he was just like, look, no, just take whatever you want, just take whatever you want out of this house. Any of this material stuff is yours. Just let's make sure that I have it in writing or whatnot, that we will have 50-50 custody, because it is that important to most of the fathers that I know. Like it's another myth that men don't care about their children, they don't want to see them, or that they're deadbeats in any way. It's a system set up to entirely fuck over men and turn them into monetary slaves who can have basically zero influence on their children and the future and the mindset of their spawn. And not only that, but they also have frequently the children are the fathers are demonized in the eyes of their children as deadbeat or whatever else. So it's just a big complicated mess of exerting control over men in every way possible.
Yeah, it's really a problem, and I've met a couple of men, usually through my mother. Actually, my mother's boyfriend, he's been divorced. He pays child support, but he has not. I think even though he's supposed to have access to, visitation with his son, he's not allowed to see him. Like his mother doesn't let him see his son, and it's just it's a regular thing, and I think it really grieves him a great deal. And I think, and there have been other people, even things like my former employer, when I did some babysitting, like it was very obvious that the situation which led to the children being in what I feel is probably neglected was due in part to the fact that he was paying child support for another child in another state, and he was under the constant threat of possibly ending up in jail because he wasn't really making ends meet. So he had like 3 children in all, and 1 child in another state, who he was giving a good portion of his money to, but meanwhile his kids were not able to always have enough food in the house, or always be able to see a doctor when they needed to. And that's another thing.
Men don't have an option of terminating that pregnancy, I mean, that ultimate decision, by the way. It's just something real quick that I forgot to say, that men don't have that right or ability to not have the baby, and if the woman decides to have the baby and decides to demand child support, it's happening. There's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, basically, there's not an option to restart your life in this situation. So if you have a relationship with a woman, and whether or not you are married, and you have a child with her, and for some reason that goes sour, and you decide you want to restart your life, your children that you have in this new life with this new woman, that's going to be really, really rough, because you're not going to be able to then give them the resources that you would have otherwise been able to give them. And that's just kind of really sad, but especially if you're, like I said, if you're not an affluent man, if you're making a job that's just above minimum wage or at minimum wage, your children in this new life are going to live in poverty.
Yeah, and I can speak to that too, like personally, and I don't think my ex is going to have any problems with me talking about this. When I first sort of got together with him, he was paying child support for his two boys, and he was seeing them every other weekend. He lived sort of, it was a difficult drive. It was one of those things that, like, nobody's just popping over and knocking on the door thinking, oh, well, if they're home. It wasn't like that. It was quite far away, 3-hour drive or something like that, and each way. And so he saw them quite often, and he was paying child support. And it was I think we were together for about 3 weeks, and he said that, well, come with me to come pick them up. So you can, because obviously they will have told her about you, and so everything should just be above board. And that was good. So we were driving along, and at the time we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and when the boys would come to visit, they would sleep on the couch and the living room floor, and because that's all we could afford. And we went and picked them up, and I'm looking at this house, and it's this really, really nice, probably built 3-4 years prior, large, maybe 2,000 square foot split level home that they had actually put $60,000 extra into after they bought it to raise it up, and so they would have more than a crawl space. They would have a nice 10-foot ceiling in half their basement, and a full ceiling in the other half instead of a crawl space, and 2 late model cars in the driveway. This was how they were living. And I was, when I got pregnant and she found out that I was pregnant, she immediately started an action in the court to have the child support raised, because she knew that after I had the baby, that was not going to be an option, so she'd better do it now. And they sat down with the mediator, and thank God they had just passed a law in the province, changed the way they do this. It used to be that the man was required to, or the non-custodial, the breadwinner, the former breadwinner, was required to provide the ex-spouse and the children with the same level of lifestyle that they had become entitled to. And then there was a court case that set a precedent that essentially said, well, if the family was still together and the guy lost his job, everybody's lifestyle would go in the tubes. Like, so why is this not allowed for, right? So when they sat down with the mediator, and the mediator looked at their 2 financial statements. He looked at her, and my ex actually said, he looked her right in the eye and said, "Lady, are you crazy?" And the mediator actually said, because this was I guess it was a case conference, right? So you're sitting down with somebody who's going to tell you how it's going to go in court if it goes to court. And the guy said, here's how it's going to go if it goes to court. Child support's going to be reduced, and the arrears, we're gonna remove a third of the arrears that he owes, given his situation over the last 4 to 5 years, and he's going to pay the rest of the arrears back. He's going to pay his monthly child support, and then we're going to tack an extra $50 onto the arrears, right? And by the time that's the second boy is 18, then that will all be paid off. That's how it's going to go down. And so she was really regretting bringing that action because it lost her money. But at the same time, there I was with I think my oldest was 7 months or so. He was still breastfeeding. We had both, my ex and I had both looked into, because of the income level of our jobs, how much does it cost to have both of us working? And it actually cost more to have both of us working and pay for daycare than to have me stay at home. And so I was staying at home, and she phoned and she started making all kinds of, I'm going away to Australia. I'm going away to Australia this summer with my friends, with my girlfriends, and I want it guaranteed that you can have the boys, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, it'd be nice if we could just, it would be nice if the child support could be late that month, since we're going to be feeding them for the entire month, right? And then she says, well, maybe it's time for you to go back to work. And I'm thinking, I'm going to put my 7-month-old breastfeeding child in a daycare and go work for the equivalent of maybe 50 cents an hour just so I can hand it to you in your $365,000 home with your 2 late model cars in the driveway, and you don't even fucking work. And there were other times when, like she would bitch about the child support being late, and because we had the boys through at that time, we had them through the whole summer, and she says, well, I needed to keep their daycare spots open, right? I need to pay the full cost of daycare over the summer to keep their spots open. And I'm thinking, but you don't work. Why are they in daycare? Right? It just, the sense of entitlement from this woman, and the amount of times that she would sort of drag us in, or, I had the maintenance enforcement, I had stocks that my parents bought me or my grandparents bought me as a child, and we had the option of either, liquidating them or rolling them over into a different stock. And I was like, well, we could really use the $4,000. And then we put it in the bank account, and the next day it was gone. The family maintenance enforcement had taken all of it. Every penny.
I've seen that happen too. Another one is having the spouse's tax refund taken by, so the husband owes child support, the wife's tax refund gets taken to pay the ex-wife for child support.
Oh, man, his unemployment insurance check, 1 December, my daughter was just a couple of months old, it was December, Christmas is coming, and his unemployment insurance check gets garnished 80%. They took 80% of his check, and I'm like, what is going on? And we phoned her to tell her we're not going to be able to have the boys over the Christmas holidays because we can't even afford to feed ourselves. She was mad at us. We'd ruined her holiday plans. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? We went down to the welfare office and we explained what happened. And they got this woman bent over backwards for us. It was like an emergency thing. She bent over back. She got us every single penny she could possibly entitle us to, including, the extra money that they give you for a crib, even though my daughter was, already a couple months old. She gave us this, the newborn allotment and all of this other, because she's just like, I can't believe they fucking did that. right before Christmas.
Yeah, that's the Child Support Enforcement Agency targeted.
Yeah.
I had more than one guy that I've dated that has had to pay child support, and every single one of them's gotten targeted at Christmas. And it's like I think there's some end of the year thing that they're trying to get in as many. Oh, we did this. Oh, we did this. Oh, we did this before the end of the year to pad their achievements
Oh, it's to
for,
justify their jobs and their budgets.
and it's really ridiculous.
Yeah,
And
no,
I've seen some really crazy things. Like one guy I dated, they garnished his wages for 4 months without sending his ex a check. And we knew it. I mean, this was not a woman that would lie about this to us. She hadn't even demanded everything she could get. She wasn't grabby or anything like that. But she was genuinely struggling, and we were genuinely struggling, and we were like, we tried to get her money every chance we could because the kid was living with her. And finally, I ended up calling the county commissioner and telling the county commissioner's office what was going on. And I went around with the county commissioner a few rounds on that. And then all of a sudden they got it through their head. There's a child who's unable to get everything that she needs because of this, because of course the state was telling this woman, well, you're getting child support, you can't get food stamps. And she was going, but I'm not getting the child support. and the state was telling us, well, you have this money that's coming in, you can't get help, you're taking the money from us. There's nothing, so there was finally the county commissioner gets hold of the agency and read somebody in the agency the riot act, and within a week she had the entire amount in one check. So they were just holding this money and not doing their job, but they made sure to collect it because they get a stipend for collecting it.
Yeah.
And it was just crazy shit like that. Some of the stuff I've seen. I've got one friend who's when he was paying child support and his ex was collecting. Now this was a genuine 50-50 custody situation. The child was with him 4 days, then her 4 days, then him 4 days, then her 4 days, all through the year. And they did this for 4 years before custody changed. And both of them were mostly in minimum wage jobs, so their income was pretty similar, but he was still paying her child support. And that was just basically something the state did because he was a man and she was a woman. And he was injured and was going to have to change jobs. And he was going for a hearing for a reduction and everything. And he got a settlement for his injury, but the settlement was going to come in 3 days later than he usually paid the support. So he was going to be 3 days late for being early. And he called to tell them, okay, it's coming on this date, you'll get the money on this date, the hearing's on this date, so this is everything that's going on, so you know. And the caseworker on the phone threatened him that if he didn't pay on time, that he'd go to jail. And they basically over 3 days, and it wasn't even 3 days late, it was just 3 days difference, threatened him with jail time. Well, then after custody switched, they let his ex-wife get $8,000 in arrears, never prosecuted her until she was that high, and eventually dropped the debt because she refused to work. And since she didn't have a job, she shouldn't owe that much money. And that was the difference in enforcement in the same set of parents' case.
Good grief.
Yeah. And repeatedly, I've also seen where the state has kept child support payments because the mother is on welfare. So when they say child support is for the child, they're kind of ignoring the fact that when the mother collects welfare payments and food stamps and Medicaid and all that, that the father's child support payments that are paid through the state are confiscated by the state, and the child doesn't see the money The
Yeah,
child doesn't see the
they don't.
benefit of the money.
Wow.
They don't.
And the mother would still be able to get those welfare payments if there was no father paying child support.
That's right. It's, but they will go after men even 10, 15 years after the fact if they
Yeah.
can pin it on a man and recoup that money. So it's clear to me that the welfare system obviously is too costly as it
Yeah.
is. If the government has to shake down, I actually, sorry Rachel, I'm stepping on you. This will be just like a second. But I read a story about one of the states. I forget which one it is. One of the Carolinas or something like that. They're switching from paper checks to direct deposit for anyone receiving benefits. And there was they profiled a man who he's on disability. He's been on disability for years. He lives with his adult son, and the state has been seizing 80% of his paper checks because he owes back child support, and none of that money is getting to his adult son or to his ex-wife. It's all just going to repay the state with interest and fees, right, for the benefits they paid out to her when she needed welfare when his kid was small, right? So they're taking 80% of his disability check, and that's the most that they can take of a paper check. They can take everything from your bank account, every penny, right? And so when they switch to direct deposit, all of these people who have these garnish orders for child support or back alimony and things like that, once they switch over, like he used to go to a check cashing place. So it was like he didn't have a bank account because if he did, the moment he deposited his check, it would just be scooped, right? Seized. And so he would go to a check cashing place so he could still get that last 20% and not be a complete and total burden on this child of his who was supporting him. Now, once they switch to direct deposit, he loses that. He becomes an absolute burden on this child. And the benefit, the garnish order is ostensibly to pay for this fucking child.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to mention that case, and it's not alone. There's a lot of disabled veterans that are being impoverished by child support payments. There are a lot of disabled people who are not veterans, and their disability checks are being garnished for child support orders. And I've known at least one person the court went after for no longer working at the job that disabled him. That he was disabled because his body would no longer perform the job, wouldn't perform the tasks that he needed to do to have the job. State went after him for for not being able to pay the same amount of child support because he couldn't do that job anymore. His disability payment wasn't as high as his work payment. It is just it's horrible greed, and what it is this is the modern version of cronyism. These departments and agencies are where politicians stash their friends in high paying or moderate paying even work positions, and so to justify having these, if they don't have a place to stash them, they'll create a place. They'll create a new department function or a new need in the department for this position or that position, and there'll be an office with a seat for somebody's butt to sit in there and get paid. And this has been going on for decades, and that is why this system has become so convoluted. And there's a lot of people working in the system that go in there with these idealistic views and get very jaded very fast and find themselves being butts in seats and paper pushers, and this is where we end up with it, going after disabled veterans for money they don't have to pay support to the state for children who are adults and have to take care of them because their income's being seized by the government.
Well, I wanted to speak a little bit to the stereotype about the woman who just can't wait to get the child support check in the mail. And the thing about it is, I really thought that this was a myth a long time ago, back when I was a little bit younger and a little more naive. Well, it wasn't too long ago. to be perfectly honest. But I mean, I was still like early 20s. I had a job at a T-shirt factory, and there were these 19-year-old girls who had obviously dropped out of high school, who both had baby daddies. That's exactly their words, baby daddies.
Yeah.
And I would just hear them, the look of glee on their face, talking about, oh my gosh, the child support check is finally coming in the mail. You know what that means? Party time, everybody, party time. And it was just so disgusting to me to see that playing out. I'm like, oh my God, you have a child. Okay, this is supposed to feed that kid. What are you gonna drink it away?
It's like Ophelia Benson, right? Having ovarian cancer and blogging about it, and then people in the manosphere donating money, right, to her PayPal account so that she can get the treatment that she needs. And then like a week later, she's blogging about these $800 fucking shoes that she bought herself, right? And you're like, what just
Yeah.
I exist. Those assholes exist out there, people, and they are real.
When we first moved to the area we live now, I had 3 jobs. I worked at a gas station. I worked as a photographer, wedding and sports and all kinds of stuff. And then I was teaching as an adjunct professor at a university. I was teaching a photography class for business students. So it was considered an IT class, but it was actually photography. It was an art. But in any case, they replaced me in the photography class because I don't have a degree. I have a life experience, which doesn't count for anything in college. And when they replaced me, they didn't tell me. So I found out the first day of 1/4's class that I was out $900 over the next 3 months, and that was not counting the gas money. So I was like, oh, shit! All of a sudden, I just lost a 1/4 of our income without warning. So I went down to Job and Family because I knew, based on the difficulty that I'd had getting the job that I had locally, that replacing that income wasn't going to happen in a day. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to apply for food stamps, and then I can just go in and tell them when I get a new job. And I sat in there, and I'm sitting in the waiting area. Everything's cubicles. There's no walls at Job and Family except outside of the area where all the caseworkers are. And I'm sitting in this cubicle. Behind it are the cubicles with the caseworkers. And there's this chick on the other side of the cubicle wall from me talking to a caseworker about how she doesn't want to give up the child support she's collecting from her 4 baby daddies, but she wants more money, and so she came down to see if she could get more benefits. And I sat and listened to them finagle and scheme, for lack of a better term, as to how she could arrange the amounts she was collecting from each of the baby daddies to just fall in below eligibility so that she could get every stinking benefit they offered, right down to there's money they offer if you want to get your car fixed. There's money they offer if you need a refrigerator. There's so many. I hadn't realized how many entitlements there are now at the welfare office. I went down there and I was thinking, well, there's medical care, and there's food stamps, and there's rent payment if you live in public housing, in housing that qualifies for it. And there's utility help, and let's see what I mentioned: food stamps, utility help, insurance, and there's cash payment, which is, you really have to be broke to qualify for that. And that's all I knew about. And never have we ever thought about trying to collect anything more than the bare minimum of what we needed to get by for a few months here or there until we got back on our feet after a disaster. Here was this chick, she was going to get, they have money for like every failing you can possibly have in your life.
They have money here? Here they have money, and my boyfriend said his ex-girlfriend was an expert at finding it.
Yeah.
Government-funded programs for ballet lessons for your kid, or
Yeah.
soccer,
Yeah.
or to pay the fees for Girl Scouts, to pay for hockey equipment, for Pee Wee hockey. Like all of these things, they're government funded partly by government and partly by charity for anybody who's low income. And like most of the schools that my kids went to were sort of, this field trip is going to cost $250, right? And if you like, you can participate in the fundraiser, and it's a 1-day fundraiser, and you will part or all will be paid for. But if you can't participate and you can't afford it, the school will absorb the cost through additional fundraising, right?
Yeah.
But and they sort of relied on the honor system there, and most of the people in that town, it was such a small town that everybody would know if you were trying to cheat, and they wouldn't let you get away with it. But there are just so many ways that you can get extra shit for your kids,
Yep.
and extra shit for yourself that people don't even think about.
Well, and it's like they'll provide free daycare so they can make you go work at Goodwill. Now, I learned about that partly because the caseworker's asking us, well, do you have a job? And she's like, ha 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 ha. First thing out of her mouth, ha ha ha. When am I gonna have time to work? I got 4 kids. I'm like, oh God. And then because I've known lots of women that have 3 and 4 kids that work. They work, their husbands work. That's what people do. You get a job and you pay your bills. But in any case, she's well, we can get you free daycare, but you're gonna have to work this number of hours a month at Goodwill. It was like if they shoved all the hours this woman was going to give her a month at Goodwill, volunteering at Goodwill, into a week, it would not count as a full-time job. And she was resentful of having to do that. Well, I don't want to have to, it's just ballistic over that. So she like turns down the daycare money so she didn't have to go work at Goodwill. It was just, the whole thing was just crazy. And
it's not, it really is sort of this, when subsidizing people's choices, and this is one of the things, like subsidizing women's unilateral choices, and this is one of the things that I find so ironic, is that 200, 300 years ago, if a child was born out of wedlock, the father had a choice, right? He could choose to legitimate the child. It would still be considered a bastard, but it would be considered to be his child, and he would be responsible for it. But it was his choice to do that, and he could choose not to do that. And this was back when women really did not have the choices at all that they do these days. The whole idea of child support for a baby daddy, it's a relatively new invention. Child support at all is a new invention. It's an outgrowth of alimony.
Well, it's not entirely a new invention. This is something that I looked up because somebody asked me about the history of child support, and I started going back farther and farther and farther, and I got back to 15th century poor laws and discovered that, well, not 15th, 16th century, that when the parishes in England became more responsible than the church for supporting the poor, then this was largely due to the sort of the fight between government and church over control of the people. When the parishes became more responsible, then they started collecting from family members when they had to provide care for poor people in general. And one of the things that they did was pass laws. One of the laws that was passed was that a woman who was an unwed mother had to disclose who the father was so they could go after him for support. So it's not exactly a new thing. It's just it wasn't necessarily called child support back then. It just had a different name. The concept has been around in English common law for centuries.
Well, we're 30 minutes into the hour. We should probably switch to the topic of alimony, because that's so exciting. I mean,
in a way, it's the same topic, though. And this is something, these were both created based on women's lower earning expectations and women's lower financial responsibility. Women were not. Women didn't have to be responsible for debts. Women didn't have to be responsible for owned property, and because of that, women didn't have the right to control owned property, and so then they didn't earn income in the way that we do now. Women had a choice whether or not to go out and work, and if they did work, it was spending money. It wasn't money they had to be responsible for. They didn't even have to be responsible for the taxes on it, and if I recall, in the United States, husbands had to be responsible for that.
That was in the UK and the US, but that was only after feminist intervention. It used to be under coverture that any income a woman earned, any property she owned, became the property of the family and would be administered by the husband, and any taxes owing would be paid by him on behalf of the family. And then feminists pulled this amazing coup d'etat of liberating women's income and property from the establishment and the institution of marriage altogether, and turned into this "what's mine is mine and what's yours is ours" honey thing.
Yeah, and he was still responsible
for everything, right? So she could sue him. She could sue if she had to pay for even her own shit, right? Out of her money, she could sue him to pay her back legally. Right, and I know that things were different among the poor. I know that among the poor, sometimes you would have these cases of, a woman would, go out of her way, work extra hard, and do a whole bunch of canning, and then she would sell her canned goods for a little bit of pin money, and her husband would take it and not let her have it. But that's chump change, and nobody's going to go to court for that.
Right.
And so you sort of look at that situation. And the thing with alimony, the problem with alimony happened because alimony wasn't based, it didn't used to be based on women's potential to earn money. Women always had the potential to earn money, and they always had potential to earn money as single women and have control over it and have less responsibility for their debts because their fathers could be sued for their debts and things like that.
No, it's based on their lower responsibility.
Yes, but at the same time, like, marriage was an economic contract, and it was essentially an economic contract that said, here's what the woman is going to give the man. The woman is going to give the man children, and a helpmeet, essentially, a partner, and the man is going to give the woman a living. And so when there was fault divorce, if the man was the one who breached his side of the bargain, the woman had every right to leave the marriage and hold him to the terms that he had promised. It was essentially just contract law. And so she was entitled to alimony if he was the one at fault for the marital breakdown. And if she was at fault, he could divorce her and he didn't owe her anything.
Yeah, and she didn't owe him anything, though, either.
She didn't owe him anything either.
Yeah, he owed if he was at fault, but she didn't know if she was at fault.
She did owe him something. She owed him the children that he paid for.
Ah.
Right? Then at that point, the tender years doctrine between the 1850 and 1900, depending on where you are, the tender years doctrine came into effect, and all of a sudden the woman didn't have to be penalized when she breached her terms, her promise, right? She didn't have to be penalized by, he owns those children now, right? I owe you those children. No, now you owe me children. And now, of course, alimony, even in cases where the woman was at fault because she cheated or whatever, right? If she was given the kids, he was still responsible to support the household of his minor children. So she was entitled to alimony because child support and alimony were kind of lumped in together.
Where I was going with that in the beginning here is that today we don't have the conditions that existed when these concepts came about. We don't have that lack of responsibility, and women's choices are completely unlimited now.
But that's why they've had to redefine why women get alimony. It's not because it's an economic contract that's sort of essentially payment for services rendered, right? Now it's to compensate her for the opportunities she gave up in order to raise your children and blah, 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 right? They've completely rejiggered the justification for having alimony into some other thing that suits women's needs at this moment. It's completely fucking bogus. Go ahead, Rachel. You've been waiting to talk. Rachel?
Sorry with the mute button. But yeah, and the thing that disturbs me is you find that you have these people, especially like affluent men, seem to be at risk for this because there'll be women who'll be like, oh, I want to be able to have the money so that I can continue my the lifestyle life I've grown accustomed to. Like, how are you fucking entitled to that? How are you
is really entitled to 3 fucking blowjobs a week from you, lady? Is that's
the thing. Many times they've brought nothing into the marriage financially, and they've brought nothing into the marriage emotionally, and then they take his money and walk, and it's crazy.
Yeah, regardless,
that we just tolerate this as a society is crazy.
It really is. It's completely absurd, and yet people just go on with their lives like this is the most normal thing ever. They just, that's totally fine to give a woman just
money for
like a $250 million just for being like married for like 3 years or something like that.
Yeah, but don't you dare call her a hooker for wanting that money, because just because she's saying she earned it by sleeping with him doesn't necessarily make her a hooker.
Have you guys ever watched Terrence Popp's videos where he actually calculates the inches? How many inches versus how many dollars, and he dissects it all the way down to, okay, the average penis is 5.75 inches, right? And the average session of sex is this many thrusts, and so you got the in and then you got the out, so we're going to double the penis length, and then we're going to multiply by the number of thrusts, and then we're going to divide that by, like how much money you end up giving her. So how much did you pay per thrust? Right? Wow. How much did you pay? How much did Tiger Woods pay per thrust? Right? It's
sad. It's really sad if you think about it, because I was actually watching Bill Burr the other night. I was watching he was talking about these different things about how great men are getting destroyed by crazy sluts. But basically, at least that was what his words were.
He says they're like Braveheart coming over the hill, faces painted, skirts flying, right, ready to jump on your dick right in front of your wife. They don't fucking care, right? There's a platoon of gold digging whores waiting for you to come off the pole.
Nothing makes a gold
but that's the thing, though.
Than a wedding ring.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though. There really are these great men who have achieved more than some of us ever will, and yet we just let them get completely destroyed because one woman is upset about something. Like she wants revenge, and she feels that she's entitled to a certain amount of money for enduring whatever. Well, if you knew that your husband was just like fucking the nanny or something like that, and you just stayed in this relationship and you endured it, like, who is at fault here?
He says Kobe Bryant's wife, okay, he cheated, okay, it's over right then. Why'd she have to stick around until the 10-year mark like some jaded cop, going for his pension, right? Because once
Oh,
it's
God.
10 years, she's entitled to, and he said, what the hell, Tiger Woods, he gets his ass kicked, right, beaten with a fucking golf club, right, then he's got to pay his wife $250 million. She's a glorified babysitter with $250 million. Like, what the fuck is that?
Well, here's a question for you. Feminists, generally speaking, feminists argue that sex under deception is rape. So if a woman wouldn't consent, if there was information that she knew and that information is held back from her, they consider her raped. So all these men whose wives stay with them until the 10-year mark and have sex with them during that time and everything, if those guys would not have consented to stay with their wives and continue to have sex with them for those 10 years, if they knew that their wives were just waiting to hit that time period when they could collect alimony, wouldn't that be the same thing? Obviously, feminists wouldn't consider it so, but I would think that for 10 years, these wives, by feminist standards, would be considered to have been raping their husbands.
Well,
Yeah,
and then they butt fuck them against their will in family court.
and
Yeah.
sometimes it's just so fucking obvious. You know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's so fucking obvious that a woman is with a man specifically for money reasons, like Melania and Donald Trump. Like, who the fuck did not know what that was about? Like, oh, do you guys remember when they got married, and there was like the big ceremony and the gigantic fucking cake and her really heavy wedding dress. Are they even still married?
I
forget.
I don't even know who she is.
Yeah.
She's like this supermodel or whatever, who's
I
like
lost count of his wives.
a quarter of his age.
I never keep track of that stuff.
Oh, but
I'll
it was a long
tell
time
you
ago.
how uninformed I am on like all the social stuff and everything. I for a while I worked at a pharmacy. On the counter of the pharmacy are 4 different shelves with magazines with people on them and everything.
And you got no clue who they are.
Yeah, the ladies would come in and they'd start talking about these people and these people that had this reality show and their outrageous behavior on this reality show, and like every week these people did some other new outrageous and stupid thing, and they'd be talking about the outrage of the outrageous behavior. And they kept saying the Kardashians. I had no fucking clue who the Kardashians were. I got made fun of so bad. They were like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And I was like, I don't know who are you talking about? And they're pointing at the people in the magazines going, these people. Well, who are they? And they'd look at me like I was from Mars.
I don't fucking understand every once in a while there's an interesting story that comes out of sort of celebrity circles as far as sort of Dave Foley. He's a Canadian celebrity. He's somebody that's extremely well known in Canada. He was on news radio with Phil Hartman and Joe Rogan, and he was with a 4-person comedy troupe that did a weekly show called Kids in the Hall in Canada, which is absolutely fucking hilarious.
That was an awesome show.
And so like I feel like I sort of you do sort of develop an attachment to somebody who is a weekly part of your evening, favorite show that you turn on every week on Thursday night or whatever, and but he actually sat down on Joe Rogan's podcast and he was talking about his divorce and I don't know if it's changed, but at that time he could not set foot in Canada. Because if he did, he would be immediately arrested and put in prison. And that's because when he was doing news radio, that was the height of his career. It was sort of one of the top sitcoms on TV at the time in the US. And that was when his wife divorced him. And so his child support and alimony were set based on that income. And at this point now, even if he's working as much as he can possibly work, if there's random comedy shows, random tours, appearances on this show or that, he still only goes home sometimes with 5% of his income after he pays his agent and his taxes and his child support, and so he owes. The Ontario government told him, if you're not prepared to come up with $600,000 tomorrow, right, you're going to jail. So he left the country and he didn't come back. And he says, and meanwhile, right, my ex is taking the kids to Morocco for a month for fucking vacation, right? And he's like, I don't, and then he's like, and I don't even know what I'm fucking paying for, because the only time she ever wanted to have sex was when she wanted to get pregnant. You
See,
know,
that's actually worth keeping track of. It's
Yeah,
topical. It's not, somebody just out there looking for attention, trying to, I don't know. I
no,
hate reality shows.
it's indicative of
me
a
too.
problem
This is
going
the
on.
situation, yeah.
And
Real situation.
Ontario is actually, I think they have the worst reputation in Canada as far as their family maintenance laws and agency.
You would think officials in Ontario would be embarrassed that people know that about them, but they're not, are they?
No, of course not. I mean, because they're not. It's not the worst because they're incompetent. It's the worst because they're draconian, right?
Yeah.
And they don't see it quite the same way. So, and here's the thing: is that you have these women that are depending on that check, and they want the check, and they're depending on the check, right? I want the check, right?
Yeah.
But then once the man's in jail, somehow they don't miss that check. It's like they're not whining that, well, where's my check? Right? No, they're happy that he's in jail, and they're happy to not get their check now, right? And it's just, I don't understand that.
That's the other bit of cronyism that is fed by this system. Just like with the cronyism that creates more and more bloat in government agencies and government departments, there is the cronyism that creates more and more work in the prison system. And I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, we now have privatized prisons. So we have this prison industrial complex that you get, lobbyists for this complex, this basically capitalizing on wrongful targeting of poor people with laws that are written to be impossible for them to comply with, so that they will end up in jail, and taxpayers can be expected to support the system that stores them like they're in a warehouse.
Yeah, and a good portion of those people are involved in minor drug charges, like they are addicts, for example, and they were in possession.
A good portion of them are in there for child support. A good portion of them are in there. This has become the America's debtor's prison, really. Child support system has become America's debtor's prison system. And
didn't they have a
alimony
system in?
Didn't they have what?
Didn't they propose a system where it would be? Oh god, there was something in New Jersey that was particularly disgusting. To do with basically something like debtor's prison. I'm trying to remember. My brain, just.
There was a problem, and I can't remember if it was in New Jersey or not, but there was a problem where laws were not being followed, and it was resulting in people who had child support debts being wrongfully imprisoned. That there was a news story about that in the last year, and I cannot, off the top of my head, remember it now.
Yeah, me neither.
That might have come out of New Jersey. New Jersey has some interesting laws and behaviors with regard to debt. If I recall correctly, they don't have bankruptcy. You can't declare bankruptcy in New Jersey. I might be wrong about that. If anybody in the chat is from New Jersey, and I am, correct me. But as I recall from the past, you couldn't file bankruptcy in New Jersey.
Well, bankruptcy wouldn't wipe out alimony or child support.
No, it doesn't. But it wipes out things like credit card debt and can make those other debts your only debt if you have a whole bunch of other debts that you're dealing with as well.
Yeah, I just find it really absurd that it seems like the debts that government gets involved in, that essentially the student debt, right? You're given a student loan. The student loan is essentially approved and guaranteed by the government, and the government funds the university in part based on how many students, and so there's this sort of collusion between the student loan system, the banks, and the government in that, and that's not expungible in a bankruptcy. And then you look at the child support and alimony and all of that, and the government intervening and collecting that money, and all of, not the courts, but the government and government agencies, and you have this other thing miraculously that it can't be expunged in a bankruptcy. Anything that the government is going to end up paying for, if you default, is and the lender isn't going to have to swallow the cost. And this is really the thing, is essentially, with student loans, the lender always knows they're going to get their money, right? Which is why it's risk-free for the lender. So the lender is like, oh, sure, I'll give this loan to this freaking guy who can't even form a coherent sentence. He could go to college. It's no problem, right? They're giving loans to people who should not be in college. They should be in trade school, or they should be in technical school, or something like that. Or they should just be going and working. And same thing with child support, because nobody has a choice. It's not, using a credit card is a choice, right? But paying child support is not a choice, and so it's like, there's no out. There's no fucking out. I just find it really bizarre that these two things, that the government has, their hand so far at the ass of it.
I have one quick correction. James Umari 1 says bankruptcy is federal law, which that's probably correct. I remember reading something that New Jersey doesn't allow it, but if it is federal law, then it would get rid of at least some debt. And then there was something else Karen was saying that I wanted to...
There's some debts you can't get rid of no matter what you do. Like, student debt, like, you can file for bankruptcy, and that's not going to work. Like, you will still have to pay those loans. It's
just think
the
about
worst kind of debt. It's going to catch up with us all, and pretty soon, because of the way that they've treated student debt. So you're going to have people who have student debt and who are paying off child support, and it's going to collapse in on itself pretty soon.
One of the things to keep in mind with student debt, and is what has resulted from the conditions that have been set up by the way the student debt system works. If you were going to buy a house, and you went to your bank or to some other lending institution, and you're like, I want to spend $60,000 on this house. This is a $60,000 house. It's $60,000 is being asked for it on the market. They got to check out the house. And if they go to the house and they find out that it's made of mattresses, and there's no windows, and there's no entryway from the street, so you can't actually go live in the house. It's not livable. You can't get there, and so on. Nobody's going to loan you money for the house. And they're going to laugh you right out of the bank.
They're liable. Their only recourse for that is, if you default, is to repossess the house.
Right.
If the house isn't worth what it's worth, then But
the same thing is done with cars. And when you go take out a loan to buy a car, you take out a loan to buy a $20,000. I don't know what new cars cost. My last vehicle that I purchased is a 1994 Plymouth Grand Voyager. So
anything in Canada, anything from
any of that,
$100,000.
Pay $20,000 for a car and you drive it off the lot. It's not worth $20,000 anymore. Even if they repossess it, they're not going to get their $20,000 back. But they will still. You go in there and go to buy this car, and the dealer's not reputable. Some institutions won't lend you money for that. If you go to buy the car and it doesn't have any tires, they won't. Maybe they won't lend you money for that. Well, we're going to sell you the car, but not the engine. You can't get away with that.
Yeah.
If you buy a car in the United States, there's lemon laws too. They sell you a car and they say this is going to be a great car, and it doesn't function the way they've advertised that it's going to function. You get your money back. You get a new car. This is not the same way with education. because it's not the same way with education. You have these people taking out student loans, getting themselves, 20, 50, 60, 100, $250,000, depending on what type of university they go to, in debt for stupid degrees, like a degree in women's studies. What are you going to do with a degree in women's studies except go into professions that involve promoting women's studies? You can't earn that money back.
Here's the thing too, right? If because this was actually part of the stipulations on the loan agreement that my boyfriend signed when he got his car, right? He has to maintain that car, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't maintain that car, then if the bank finds out that he's not taking care of that car, right? They can just demand all of their money, bam, like just give it all back right now.
Yeah.
Right? All in the loan. And so there is no stipulation in a student loan as to what kind of grades you need to maintain, what kind of what the economic value of the degree is, anything like that.
You can be ordered to pay your loan back in early for bad grades. You get kicked out of school and your loan's canceled if you get bad grades. If you're failing.
That's good.
But you can still, if you get straight A's, but you're getting a degree in underwater basket weaving or 15th century French poetry, or something like that, where when you get out of college, you get through 4 years at $60,000 a year of college, and you've got a useless degree. That it doesn't do you any good if straight A's were the stipulation. The stipulation for loaning you money needs to be that you're buying something functional and useful with it that's going to have value in any other area of your life. Like with your car, the reason that they'll loan you money for your car is because you're going to go to work in it and earn the money to pay them back. With your house, the reason that they'll loan you money because you're going to be able to pay them back, or they can take the house and sell it and get their money back. There's nothing that keeps universities from peddling junk degrees to naive college students, naive high school students, and their parents. And the sick thing is that a lot of times they'll use intellectual and political snobbishness to make the sale.
Yeah.
Oh yes, we have a degree in 15th century French poetry because we're so sophisticated. Sorry, but no, it's not worth anything.
Or they'll even offer jobs. They'll say, "Oh, we're gonna help you find a job, and you're gonna be fine. So you'll pay it off just real easy."
Well,
and
what they're doing when they do that with that snobbishness is they're selling you a luxury item, right? Mm-hmm. They're selling you. I mean that's why it has prestige, right? It's like the long manicured fingernails and the perfectly teased hair on a woman that say, look how many dishes I don't have to do in a day, and look how little time I have to spend outside in the elements, right? Yeah. I can actually look like, and my high heels, look how far I don't have to walk. And it's an indicator of status. It's an indicator of wealth, that you don't have to wash your own dishes, and you don't have to ever be outside, and you don't ever have to walk anywhere because you can drive yourself or you can afford a cab, right? And so all of and you don't have to go out and earn a living. You can just go and blow $60,000 on a fucking degree in fucking underground basket weaving or some shit, or rubbing menstrual blood all over your face and taking a picture and calling it art, right? You can take that degree because you don't have to earn a living. It's a sign of status.
Right? Captain Gerber is asking, student loans should be limited to areas that have an existing market? ? Well, my answer to that is no, but if a university is instrumental in talking a student and making false promises to a student, and talking a student into incurring thousands of dollars of debt for a junk degree that they have made sound valuable when in fact it's not, they should be held as responsible for that as your local car dealer is if he sells you a car without an engine and tells you you're going to be able to drive it to work and back. In other words, if the university promises to get you a job and they can't, the university should have to pay back the loan.
Yeah, I could see that. I could
Especially,
absolutely see that.
yeah, especially if they're going to get you a job with a degree in underwater basket weaving.
Yeah, and that's the thing though, because that's one of the things that they use to get people into these smaller private technical schools, and that's really where they get you, because they'll basically make any promise under the sun, and they'll say, oh, well, we'll help you find a job when you leave. But the thing about it is that they may not tell you that you need to have a certain amount. Like, for example, like when I went through the exact same thing with the art institutes, and I strongly suggest against people going into there, like, go and get an actual. If you must go into art, I would suggest probably just getting a whole bunch of instructional books and learning software. I mean, the amount that I spent at that school, I probably could have purchased CS4 and every single book that I needed to learn it. But instead, I went up there.
One of the things too, like, because my older boy is interested in animation, and he's one of those sort of talented people who understands movement and has a very good understanding of motion and is very talented in doing that. What the suggestion was for him from people sort of in the know in the industry would be that he would be better served by either building a portfolio of stuff that he could put up on YouTube, like Dr. Randomer Cam, right, and then seeking a job somewhere, or doing an internship at a video game developer or something. I think we have I think EA might have an office here.
Yeah. And that's actually going to be very beneficial. I mean, I would strongly suggest
like an unpaid internship is
the programs,
but at least you're not paying
the program.
Right, and because doing a 2-year or 3-year degree in computer animation or whatever, by the time you're out, the software that they taught you on is already outdated. Right?
That's actually a really common thing in a lot of art areas and some other areas. Is when I was in college, by the time I was there, and I was there in the 90s, the developing process for film had moved on from what they had taught, when my father was in college. When I took a photography class for kicks. Now you got to realize when I say for kicks, it's because at 18 years old, I had been processing film already for 5 years. I'd been working as a professional photographer for 3 years, so it was kind of silly for me to take a class in it. I was shooting color film at home, and I was I was well beyond what I was going to be in the class for, as far as most of what I'd be learning in there. But it can be a lot of fun to get another artist's perspective on the art. And there's I was going to be there anyway, and so I did. One of the things I learned was that they don't progress at universities in technology very quickly at all. The chemicals we were taught to use in 1991 were the same chemicals my dad was taught to use in the 60s, and we're talking we're talking decades of development there that were just completely ignored. And I laughed about it at the time. Well, then in 2002, I was working at a camera store. It was the first place I went back to work after I started recovering from a car accident. And students started coming in to get supplies for photo classes at a local university. Well, I thought, oh, well, I bet they've progressed by now, and I thought they'd be using the C41 process and shooting with color film and everything. Nope, they were still shooting with black and white film, and they were still using D76 developer. and it just blew my mind. It was like, does the school for mechanics at that university teach the students how to repair the hand crank that starts the car?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I absolutely, I agree. I agree. It's not good. But we have wandered like way far off the original topic, and
Oh, I know, but the thing about it is that the conversation was I think it was very, very important, because I think people should really know about how predatory. But yeah, we did.
I do
We
think
did
so.
wander.
I do think so. But Allison, our absentee leader, has posted a question in the chat. Do you know why the child support laws are so strict in America? What's the history of that? Okay, like
Yeah.
essentially the history of that, why they're so strict, is I think because of how easy of access women have, single mothers have, to state benefits, right? And as much as the state wants to, like, and this is really the thing. This is how the government buys women's votes. Is the government takes some guy, right, and shakes him upside down, and all the change kind of falls out of his pockets, and the government scoops it all up and then kicks him in the balls and sends him on his way, and then they tie it all up in this pretty little bow, right, and they hand it to the woman, and they say, "I'm your hero," right? And that's what the state does when and they do that not just to court women's votes, but they also do that in order to recoup the cost of having to pay for women's votes themselves through their own ability to generate, revenue, right? No,
It's the ultimate cronyism.
it's absolutely, the state wants to set itself up as the hero of women, and it's my hero, right? Obama is my hero, the life of Julia, all that bullshit, right? And nobody realizes that no matter whether it's a direct payment from a man, right, that the state seizes his income and garnishes 80% of his disability check or whatever the fuck they do, whatever fucked up shit they're going to do to him, right? Whether it's that or whether they just confiscate, they just skim the incomes and the prosperity of all the other men in the society, and then they just like put it in a nice pink envelope and hand it to women. This is why these laws, the child support laws, are so draconian, because the government can't afford to give women everything women want, right? They have to take it from men whenever they have any kind of justification, even if it means taking it from out of a 17-year-old boy's paper route to pay for the baby of the 35-year-old fucking teacher who raped him when he was 15, right?
Oh,
They are willing to do that.
Part of it is social attitudes too, and
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure if you have the cause and effect entirely there. As far as the affording, the American government has not made affordability a factor in decisions on like what the laws are going to be, what the government actions, what actions the government's going to take, and so on during my lifetime, and probably not for a few decades prior. If you want to understand women and the welfare system, look up a movie. I think the title was Claudine. It has James Earl Jones in it. Watch that movie. It's a film about welfare and marriage, and it goes back to when the welfare system was first brought about. One of the rules was there could not be a man of wage earning capability, an adult man of wage earning capability, in the house for the house to collect welfare. And so that was like, they pushed the fathers out of the homes. But as far as the strictness of child support laws in 2015 United States, part of that actually goes back to the Republicans. This is one of the reasons why I tell men's rights activists over and over again, you cannot look to left-right politics for a solution to men's issues, because both sides are gynocentric.
Yeah.
On the Democrat side, we have, oh, the poor women. Women can't take care of themselves. They must look to daddy government for assistance. And on the Republican side, we have, oh, the poor women. Women can't take care of themselves. Daddy government must force men to take care of them. And so you have the welfare reform laws that were passed during the start of the Bush administration as part of a contract with America. And from a religious conservative perspective, they sounded reasonable to religious conservatives in that they sounded like they were supporting keeping families together, and instead of breaking families up and making people responsible adults. Well, they were only considering the men responsible adults. They weren't considering the women responsible adults.
Yeah.
And so what they did was, that's where it was put into law, that's where it was written into law, that if an unwed mother, whether it's because she's divorced or never married, which is actually more frequent in the United States now than divorced single motherhood,
Yeah.
if she goes on welfare, they can collect from the father to make up for the money that they're using to support the mother, rather than trying to get men engaged in taking custody of their children and taking responsibility by actually being in their children's lives, which is what most estranged fathers want to do. They are treating them as walking wallets and presuming them abandoners and deadbeats and stiff-arming them for money. And so you have two sides to that. You have the Democrats presuming women helpless and unable to take care of themselves and their children, and then you have the Republicans presuming men responsible for them being in that situation.
Oh yeah, no, it's all just this. It's the same coin, different side. It is absolutely. It's just a matter of who's responsible, and the government does want to be the hero. The government does want to come in and say either I'll rescue you or I'll force this man to rescue you. And it just this is just how it works. And with the way that the welfare system was set up in the beginning, because it caused an exodus of men from families, and some of those men actually weren't kicked out. Some of those men left because it was the best way that they could support a family if they were underemployed. It was a guaranteed check every month for their wife and their kids, right? So they would. Yeah. A lot of them left voluntarily because it was just essentially the best solution.
You want a perfect storm. The welfare system came about. It was started when the Jim Crow laws that limited what kind of work black men could get were still in effect. So you had law keeping black men from earning a supporting wage, and then you had law that came in and said, if you don't live with your wife and kids, we'll pay them more money than you can earn.
Yeah, no, and like this is one of the things that is such a tragedy, right? Because nobody could ever argue that slavery was well intentioned toward blacks.
Some people did, though.
Yes, but
Calhoun did.
We would look back at it now and we would say that's a load of fucking horse shit, right?
It was.
But you look at it, the black, and there were practices within slavery that were common that were specifically designed to undermine the black family, to split the black family up, to make it so that families could not be intact. They would sell the husband one way and the wife the other way and the kids that way, right? That was just par for the course, and it was seen as a way of sort of keeping the social fabric frayed in that community so that they could be more easily subjugated, right? And then on comes, a century later, we have this system that, everybody still thinks was well intentioned, and maybe it was. I don't fucking know, right? But that was almost like slavery didn't kill the black family. In the 1920s, 85% of adult blacks were married. They were living in intact marriages, right? And it was the war on poverty that killed the fucking black family. And that's just the saddest fucking thing. That's the law of unintended. I hope they were unintended, but it's the law of unintended consequences, right? When you give people an enemy to fight, and they're going to stick together and fight that enemy, right? And that enemy is slavery. That's one thing, right? But when you give people, you know, a set of financial incentives and disincentives, right, that will cause them to fragment, right? That doesn't look like an enemy. It looks like your friend. Then that's what's going to happen.
Well, you know, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions for a very good reason. A lot of well-intentioned things are very poorly thought out before they're actually done by people, and you never know whether this was predictable, what the result was predictable or not, and you never know what people were thinking in the past unless they actually talked about it. But I think a large contributing factor to this is the elitism of politicians who consider their capability, especially their intellectual capability, superior to everybody else's. And so their good intentions come from a very bad place of considering groups of people less capable of achieving on their own. And anytime you start from that position, we need to help you because you can't help yourself. Anytime you start from that position, you're going to cause damage. I would actually use the term disableism. You know, that you presume disability where disability isn't present. It is one of the cruelest things you can do to another person, to artificially disable them in some way or another.
Okay, so I've stepped in because we got to end this thing. Rachel, do what you need to do.
Yes. Thanks.
And if anyone speaks up.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I was asking you guys to wrap it up, but yeah, thank you everybody for the show. I mean, everybody who works on this show, our wonderful panelists, and we'll be seeing you next week with a whole bunch of new topics and all kinds of fun stuff. So peace out.